Hello everyone, Karrington here. Just to give you a quick update before this interview starts, for some reason my microphone gets severely choppy and messed up halfway through. I'm not sure what happened, so I apologize about the sound, but I'm going to keep the interview, and hopefully we can have Wraith Games on again and have on a different interview where this does not happen. Again, I apologize. Give you a heads up. Once again, my audio messes up halfway through the interview. Enjoy the show. Welcome to Real Dudes Podcast. I'm your host, Karrington, and unfortunately, it's just me today. But I am not alone, fear not. I have two amazing guests with me today. I spent some time with one of them about a month ago, and I had a fantastic time. From Wraith Games, I have with me Jay and Steve. How are you guys today?
Doing great. How are you?
Not so bad. Got the day off from my, real job, as I say that in quotation marks, and so I've been chilling all day today. It's not so bad. But for you guys,
how you feeling, Steve?
I'm feeling all right. Things are good. It's not as cold as it was yesterday. There's no snow, so
yeah, you gotta love Ohio weather. I think not yesterday, but the day before that, when it was just snowing off and on. You gotta love Ohio. So how about you guys kind of give you a small introduction about each of you individually, and then an introduction to the company Wraith Games itself.
Okay. So I am the founder and creative director, as well as lead designer here at Wraith Games. Jay Kidd. I can't remember for the life of me if he's already said that.
I think I said Jay at least. Yeah, I think.
We'll fix this in post.
Exactly.
So I started the company back in 2005. It was me and a handful of friends because I kind of knew I wanted to make games ever since I was 9, playing on the Super Nintendo. And when I finally kind of got old enough to start understanding like computer art and computer programming, that's when a group of my friends got together and we found a little club at the time. We thought it was a big deal, Wraith Games. And as time went on, I ended up meeting Steve in high school, and some of the previous team members kind of dropped off, but we gained a bunch of new people. And over the past, little over a decade, we turned it into something real. We turned it into an award-winning game development company. So.
And Steve, how about yourself? How did you get started and then eventually get involved with Wraith Games?
So I'd known since second grade I'd want to do video games, but I was living in Kentucky where no games were made. And this was like circa 1998. So nobody wanted to deal with a kid who wanted to make video games. And so I was in a technical school where I met Jay. It was like a high school. I had made a prototype of a Flash game because I was really into Flash. And it caught his attention. He was like, hey, you should come on board and make video games with us. And I was like, no thanks, not for me, because I'd always been told, you can't make video games, it's the Midwest, So I went off to do graphic design at Cincinnati State, actually, and worked some graphic design jobs, and felt like maybe that dream from second grade could be a reality now. So I linked back up with Jay, and it's kind of been an upward momentum ever since.
Very nice. Glad to hear it for both of you, really, because when I was talking to Jay, you guys seem to be doing a lot as far as development's concerned and within the community, and I just have to tip my hat off to you for the things that both you guys are doing. It seems like a lot of fun, and I hope you guys continue on what you are doing each and every day. So,
thanks.
You're very welcome. So why the name Wraith Games?
So it's actually kind of weird. Originally, for about like 2 or 3 months, we were calling ourselves Mind's Eye Games, which is it's so wordy. It's actually physically hard for me to say now. It's like my lips don't like to make those shapes. Um, and it was around that time when I really started getting into Dungeons and Dragons with the other people who were working with me, and one of the coolest monsters, like artistically, the
Mhm.
coolest pictures in the 3.0, 3.5 monster manual is just the standard Wraith. And it was just such a cool concept graphically for a monster. I'm like, oh man, he's just like haunted sheets. He's awesome. That at that point I'm like, what if we were Wraith Games? And it was really dumb because from a kind of a 15, 16-year-old perspective, we picked it just because it was really rad. And later on, this is something Steve can talk about a little more. Later on, I kind of wanted to change the name to something else, and he and a couple of our other team members are like, "Don't you dare!" Because Steve did this huge rebrand of Wraith when he got on board, new logos, new graphics, new website, like all this stuff to really like turn up the volume, on what we were.
Mhm.
And I'm glad I'm glad that I didn't get my way and change it to something kind of less iconic, because I think Wraith Games just sounds really good.
Oh, I totally agree. So, Steve, what made you want to keep the name besides spending a whole bunch of work redoing a whole logo and stuff like that?
Well, so it had been Wraith Games since 2007, for as long as I know. And
It was 2005.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, is that for as long as I know? But
Yeah, yeah.
um, the that the name, I can't remember what it is you wanted to change it to, but I know that like Wraith Games was like it's two syllables. It kind of rolls off the tongue, and
Hmm.
you're right. It became an iconic sort of name, and just when I came on board, I was like, we're not doing this chiller text logo anymore. We're gonna change it. We're gonna turn it into something stylized and graffiti-esque, and something that people can look at and say, oh yeah, I've seen that before.
Very cool, very cool. I know when I was like trying to find local indie developers in the area, you guys were probably one of the first names to come up, and so that name, I was like, man, that's a really cool name. So I like the name too, and the logo is actually pretty freaking awesome. So, Steve,
Thanks.
thank you for trying to keeping the name and and the sweet logo.
And he says that he doesn't remember what the other options were. One option that I really enjoyed, because I this sticks with me,
Hmm.
and I've always said that if I do another endeavor that's not Wraith related, I'm actually going to steal this name.
Wait, is it
Was
Boy Genius?
Boy Genius. I just love it. I
Oh,
don't know why.
So should I call you Jimmy Neutron then?
No, no, no.
Okay, okay. Just curious, just out of curiosity.
now
I'm
now I
I'm
remember.
more
Now I remember why I didn't want you to change the name.
There's already another boy genius out there.
see. I'm more inclined towards Dexter Boy Genius rather
Okay,
than Jimmy
okay.
Neutron Boy
He is the
Genius.
OG boy genius. I will say that.
He is. He is.
So as far as Wraith Games is concerned, what were some, Jay, if you want to talk about some of those early game concepts you guys may have had when you first started out, and what they were like? Because I know when I spent all that time with you, you said you probably made a bunch of just crappy games. If you don't mind, just kind of skimming over those. And if Steve, if you were involved with those projects, don't be afraid to just come right on in and talk about them as well.
Absolutely.
So, okay, I'm actually kind of glad you're asking about this, because normally when we talk to podcasts and news press and stuff, that kind of phase in development, which we call the 50 terrible prototypes, is skimmed over really, really quickly, and only a couple of them are ever really talked about.
Well, honestly,
But
before
in
you
the
start
50,
talking about it real quick, when you were telling me about it, I was actually fascinated by the entire journey from beginning to end, like from where you guys started to where you guys are now. So I really wanted to like bring this out. So I found this very fascinating. Sorry, I just had to say that.
no, don't apologize at all. So it's kind of weird because there's this thing. I'm marrying Christy, who is one of our programmers, and we've been together. We've been together now about a decade. Um, and the thing is that oftentimes I'll get down on myself and I'll say, "Oh no, Wraith is going to be a failure for this and this reason." And then she's like, "No, that's stupid. What are you even talking about?" And I remind her, I'm like, well, you always fail on your first project. And she's like, well, this is our third project, and that's if you don't count the 50 terrible prototypes. And I'm like, you don't count the 50 terrible prototypes. But the funny thing is, the more I realize, the more I have to say, yeah, you do. You do count those. Just because they taught us how to fail,
Hmm.
and they taught us, they were really super big rough drafts. So let me launch into some of those. Off the ones I can remember off the top of my head. So the first game I remember kind of putting to computer was a game called Operation Roswell, and it was the absolute crappiest Space Invaders clone you can possibly imagine. And it had ripped sprites from other games, and just this awful like photorealistic cloud background, and none of the enemies, like I hadn't yet got it into my mind that one of the things that makes Space Invaders great is the fact that the enemies move in lines.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Right.
They march basically, and my enemies just flew around everywhere, and not even in a satisfying way. It was a random value. So it wasn't just crappy Space Invaders, it was crappy Galaxian too. So I broke way too many rules with that. And then after that, I created a small racing game based off of like old arcade racers called Burn Rubber, because I had not yet mastered names. And I arguably haven't mastered names now. I'll come up with name concepts, and Steve or Lance will just be like, "That's a stupid name,"
They're all
evidenced by boy
puns.
genius. I like puns. Puns are the purest form of humor, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, but they're terrible puns.
That's the
almost
point.
almost dad humor like puns.
No, worse,
That's
like subhuman puns.
Jay,
so.
it's okay. You live and learn, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You live and learn. Except I don't. I just live and make more puns. So after Burn Rubber, because Burn Rubber, its whole thing was you are constantly going forward, and all of the enemies are parked. All of the other cars are parked. So there's like 1,000 cars on this racetrack, and it's your job just to dodge them all. And you're going to try to get to the finish line while seeing how far you can go. And in many ways, it was very similar to like a free runner now, except that it wasn't procedurally generated. It was the same level every time. And so after Burn Rubber, I did a Frogger clone called Chicken Crossing, which was a chicken crossing the road, because you never see that from people's first projects. No, I was completely original, let me tell you. Sarcasm. um, then we had the Stickman Adventures, which was actually probably one of my best early games. The only problem is I was also experimenting with voice acting, and no, it was bad.
So
And at the oops, sorry.
I was gonna say, so will we ever hear that voice acting today?
Actually, one of the weird things is I actually am trained to do voice acting. At the time I was not.
Okay,
So if you're
okay.
asking if you're asking will I be in a game at some point, I might be like, the White Room is for loading and unloading of passengers, or something stupid like that, but you won't hear the actual audio files from the original game. And I will definitely not be headlining anything ever, but if we have some background stuff, maybe. Um
Okay, okay. Just had to ask.
yeah. So that was an interesting concept, and I think it was at the time we had a gentleman named Joseph Foltz, who a lot of our team affectionately refers to as Gundam Guy. That was back when he was on the team, and I think he came up with the concept. I could be wrong about that, but it's a kung fu melodrama about stick people.
Interesting.
Yeah, the gameplay is basically Donkey Kong meets elevator action.
I would actually play that. Not gonna lie.
Yeah, it's one of those things where if it wasn't stick people, like if we could turn this concept into something cool without stick people, definitely, because all of the dialogue was really like, "You killed my father, prepare to die." You know, it was very over the top, very kung fu movies of the 1970s. But you were ascending this tower because your girlfriend at the time, because that's not really the type of plot we do now, you know, the whole kidnap girlfriend type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But that's I was 15, so I was stupid. So you were ascending this tower because this evil ninja crime lord has kidnapped your girlfriend, and you have to like master different like mystical kung fu techniques while also, you know, not getting your face stomped in while going up this tower. Um, After that, we did a brief kind of Mario clone called Super Skyhopper. We started a prototype called Pandora's Box, and then we did the prototype for our most infamous game, Fly Guy, and I'll get back to Fly Guy later. So these were just one after another in quick succession. Funnily enough, the game I started working on second, and at this point in time, in the 2005-2006 piece of time,
Mm-hmm.
we were a team in the loosest sense of the word. Like, we had a few people who were giving some ideas, but most people are like, I don't want to learn to make art. I don't want to learn to program. It's all you, Jay. And then when you get successful, you know, we'll ride in the coattails. Which was high school, really.
Of course,
you know,
yeah.
that's high
Even
school
college
in general.
too. Yeah.
So the thing was that the second game I started working on was a puzzle game for my mom. And at the time, I was really into Tetris,
Okay.
and I had heard about Bejeweled, and I had seen screenshots of Bejeweled. And remember, this is 2006, you know, like early 2006.
Okay.
So I tried in my head to say how, and again, this was pre-YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
That's a thing that needs to be said. It was very difficult to get gameplay video of a game. You know, you're not gonna see a game being played unless you play it. And it was a paid game, Bejeweled was.
And any young people listening out there, I mean, YouTube, I think, was 2007. It was very hard to watch videos on the internet, just in general at this point, because it was just hard. You either your internet connection wasn't fast enough, and if it was, the video quality sucked.
YouTube, to my knowledge, YouTube was around in 2006, but this was before Google bought it. And so the only things on YouTube were like people just talking about their day. There was no gameplay video. People didn't even know how to capture gameplay video. And if they did, the earliest YouTube gaming videos were people taking their webcams and looking at their screens.
True.
And this was before that. So this is before people realized they could do that. So in my head, I'm like, okay, I understand the basic objective of this game. How do I deconstruct it? And so I made a weird little game where you were clicking on blocks to permanently destroy them, trying to make matches of 4 or more, and then as you did, you had a resource that was going down, but each time you made a column or row, you got some of that resource back. And I gave it to my mom, and she didn't like it very much.
Now, before we go a little further, I just want to make this clear for everyone who's listening to the show. Now, your mother, you're making this game for your mother. Is
Yes.
she a gamer?
So gamer is a weird sort of word. It's an immediately descriptive word for a type of person who plays video games.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, It's actually really funny. So I have two moms. I was brought in by a family member because my other mom was dying of cancer. So the mom I'm talking about in this particular story is my adoptive mom. Um, she played puzzle games all the time. She was a huge puzzle gamer, and she was also really good at Soul Calibur 2. She could probably still beat me in Soul Calibur 2, and that's not okay. Um, well, I played Soul Calibur tournaments for a while, and in
Gotcha.
4, and she could probably still kick my butt in 2. And then she was also always ready to play some Donkey Kong and stuff like that. So I would say, yeah, at the time she was a gamer.
Okay.
Now my other mom, my birth mom, definitely a gamer. The only reason she stopped was because her eyesight failed her. So yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Sad to hear, but you know, sometimes life.
Oh,
sucks.
she takes it in stride.
Okay, good.
But yeah, so the thing is that I gave her this game and she didn't like it very much. She's like, "Oh, honey, it hurts my eyes."
And this is
Oh,
your
man.
adoptive mother, right?
Yeah, this is my adoptive mom.
Okay.
And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And I'm like, "But I made it for you. I want you to be proud of me." And she's like, "Oh, honey, I am proud of you. Proud of what? Proud of who you are, not what you do." And I'm like, "I want you to be proud of what I do, though, you know?"
That had to
And
hurt.
She
That had to
she
hurt.
doesn't sound like that. Also, she does not. He puts that accent on her for all the time.
For theatrical, maybe it's a little bit of drama.
I don't know. I think it's just something that he does.
Jay, no response.
yeah, I have no response. I'm sitting here breathless. Like,
He'll admit it.
Is she? Is she from a particular area? Like, say, maybe Boston or something like that, or is she from around here?
no, she isn't. She isn't
Okay.
from Boston. She's from Ohio, and then she moved to Germany for a while, and then like Nevada or something, and then came back. So
Yeah, I have no reason.
She does-
I haven't heard her, so I can't say for sure. But Steve, you could be a good judge for that. So if she, Jay,
Nothing.
no, I got literally nothing. I got literally nothing.
You know what's funny? You know, if I do an impression of like my dad, I make my voice deeper, but in reality, my voice is deeper than his. So you know, we do all things sometimes.
I think one of the reasons my mind immediately goes to that voice is probably twofold. One, for some reason, she reminds me so much of Fran Drescher's mom on The Nanny,
Okay.
and I don't know if that's an accurate portrayal, but that is where my brain goes almost immediately when I think of her. And also the sheer amount of Yiddish that is used in our household is just way too high. Like, so my brain, whenever it hears her talk, that is the voice that I hear her with. So
Does she know? Is she
the
aware of
voice
this
that comes out of
impression
my mouth.
also?
She is absolutely aware of this impression. There have been times where she's like, "I don't sound like that." I'm like, "Yeah, you do." Like in my head, you absolutely do.
All right, a little bit of a tangent. So you made this game for her, and she's saying it hurts her eyes, and
Yeah.
saying she's proud of who you are, but not what you do. So what happens with this game at this time?
So I angrily go back to my room and start trying to make it better, realizing that I don't think I can at the time. And then every 6 months, I kind of drag it out of like my files and work on it a little more. But then for like a year in like 2008, I don't do anything with it until I meet Christy. And at the time we had just started, hitting it off. We hadn't started dating yet, and I'm trying to impress her because I'm like, "Oh, well, I make video games, because we met at an anime convention, and ultimately, she likes video games and anime and comic books and fantasy novels. She is one of the nerdiest people I know. And so I'm like, oh, well, I make video games. And she's like, oh, you do? Show me something. And I showed her Collapsus. And I'm like, yeah, it's not very good. And she fell in love with it. We used to joke quite a lot that she wasn't marrying me for me. She was marrying me for Collapsus. And we've stopped using that joke, even though both of us think it's hilarious, because we were using that joke at booths, at gaming booths, and some of our other team members are like, "Man, that makes Christy sound terrible. That makes her sound like a horrible person." And so we completely cut that from our spiel, even though we both think it's hilarious.
I'm not offended by it. I think it's quite entertaining. Now, real quick, Steve, were you aware of Collapsus at this point? Were you on the team and were you aware of it?
I'd known about it. I'll be honest. I was not into Collapsus for the longest time, and I was more interested in the other ideas that they had kind of milling around.
Like Burger Brother.
No, we're talking about like stuff that we have in production or pre-production now, like physics
Stuff beyond the prototypes. Stuff beyond those.
Gotcha.
Like, just, I'm not a puzzle guy at all. Like I can do Tetris for maybe 5 minutes, and then I'm like, I need something else.
Fair enough. I was just curious. So Jay, you were talking about impressing Christy.
Yeah. So that was something I was doing, and she's a computer science major, and so trying to help out the company at the time, she wasn't officially part of Wraith, but she was edging her way in. She convinced some of our other team members to work on it, even though I said I don't want to have anything to do with Collapsus. They're like deep emotional scars. Mom cries in room, listens to Linkin Park. So she ends up convincing them to kind of give it a try and turn it into something bigger and better than it was. And I end up getting on board with that. But like flashing away from Collapsus for a while, because I know it'll probably come back.
Oh, yes, for sure.
As Christy actually sneaks into the room. So the thing is that near the end of the 50 terrible prototypes, we started working on 3 3D games.
Okay.
Well, 4 3D games if you want to be less pedantic, I guess, than I'm being. In the same Java-based engine that we were doing the other games, we started working on a 3D maze game, which I believe we were calling like Labyrinth Lord or something like that. It was something really dumb. But I ended up porting that to the PSP early on, and it was awful. Whether you played it on PC or on PSP, it was terrible. But that's what gave us the confidence to move on to a Dark Basic derivative engine and start working on some 3D stuff. And keep in mind, this was 2008. We were all just kind of out of high school at that point. So we created a really awful first-person horror game called Project Zion, which we ended up keeping the idea, and we're gonna turn it into something not terrible eventually. We also created a prototype. This is again during the 50 terrible prototypes phase.
Okay.
And I've not even covered all of them, and I'm not going to because there's just too many.
Right? Or roughly.
Yeah, I think I may have hit 15. You know what I mean? So I'm not gonna hit all of them because some of them are laughably bad. But another one that we worked on was called Ubermatch, and the idea was, and this would not fly today, and I wouldn't want it to fly today, but the reason it doesn't fly is actually the title. The gameplay is fine, but you play as a creature, I guess, a super soldier created by the Nazis. And what ends up happening is you, in your tube, break out a little premature. And being a mindless killing machine, because that's all the Nazis know how to do, you just start killing Nazis. just left and right everywhere. And so you're this unstoppable Frankenstein's monster, killing Nazis, and you're going floor to floor. You start it in the basement, and you go up, and you just are trying to get out of this compound. And then at the end of the game, you were going to be saved by some like U.S. British soldiers, the Allies, and turned into a force of good. Kind of almost a Hellboy kind of a thing. But with the name alone, oops, sorry.
I was going to say at the time too, I'm sure World War II games were, if I remember right, highly popular at this time.
They were very, very popular. This was actually before, because I like to think that the decline of World War II games was at Nazi Zombies. Like, pre-Nazi Zombies, people were making actual World War II games, and then post-Nazi Zombies, people were just like, it's more of a zombie game, but we have all these Nazi assets. What are we going to do with it? And so we were right smack dab in the middle of good World War II games. And it was something that was more fun and innocent, but like the name alone is regrettable. Like looking back on it, I'm like, no, that's good that we didn't make that full. And then after that was what I would consider our third biggest success. Success as far as player base. We created an online first-person shooter called Frag the Week Online, and it was just an arena shooter. The cool thing about the server is it could support, I believe, one or 200 players at a time. And that was the best part about it, and that's really sad to say. So we had during this a bunch of people from my and Steve's schools. We went to Butler Tech, different parts of Butler. We had a bunch of people in the beta for that, and they would play it pretty religiously, which was great, in this big arena. And I mean, to be fair, it was not the most fun of games. It was a big sandbox where we had built some buildings and given some people some space guns, and then they ran around it and shot each other. And the big drive was there were a bunch of them, a bunch of people on this little world. And the reason we actually stopped supporting it, because the server end of it was not bad at all. You could run it off a little XAMPP server on a flash drive, which was amazing. I'm very happy with
actually,
that. Yeah. Part of me wants to kind of dig around the old code and be like, what did I do right? That many people on a flash. No, the name is way too dumb. Frag the Week Online, FTW Online. So no. But I ended up actually meeting some friends because they're like, "Oh man, have you played this game?" And I'm like, "Man, I made this game." And they're like, "What?" And because that's how high schoolers / post high schoolers talk, I guess. And so we ended up shutting the whole thing down, mainly because I'm a crazy perfectionist. And you can't tell that by the fact that all these prototypes are terrible. But if I want a feature in a game, I will not rest until it's in there, because my brain sees the project with that feature, and anything less means that it's broken. And I am aware that is a terrible way to make a video game.
So that was the case. We wouldn't have screw-ups like Assassin's Creed. I can't remember whichever one it was a few years ago that had all the bugs that caused Ubisoft to make it take a break. You wouldn't have things like that if every game developer was the way you think.
Well, that's the thing about AAA is everything is there's a lot of money and there's a lot of moving parts, and they can't be like that. And it's the only way that we're able to do that is our cost of production is really low. And so we can work pretty consistently off of very, very little funds. And that's the only reason why I'm allowed to do this. I have a feeling that after Collapsus is released and we're starting to do more stuff, like more events and everything like that, we're going to get to a point where they're just like, Jay, shut up. The game has to ship. But luckily, no one's told me that yet. But
Wait
the
for me.
reason we... Huh?
It takes like 3 of us to beat him down sometimes.
There has to be a majority. But
Change your mind about something.
yeah, exactly. And the thing is that one person will say something, and I'm like, oh, and I'll take a few days to think about it, and it'll mull over my brain. But if we have like 3 people all at once, then immediately I'm pretty much like, okay, fine, we'll do it your way. But the reason we shut down Frag of the Week is because we couldn't get melee to work. We couldn't get like swords to work properly. Anytime the opponent would see you and you were wielding a sword, you'd see your own sword animation on your end, but all they would see is you holding a sword with a muzzle flash. So you were holding yeah, exactly. But only if they were within range. And the reason for this is the other end, the opponent's end, did not have the animation files for sword swinging. And in fact, third-person sword swinging, looking at a person swinging a sword in third person, just didn't exist. And it would have been very difficult for us to do that. And so we just shut the whole thing down, much to like the chagrin of like 30 people. You know what I mean?
Right. But I'm sure those 30 people, despite being which, according to your standards, if they were prototype, I'm sure those 30 or so people, I'm sure they absolutely loved it because it sounds like a great concept. As simple as it is, it sounds great. Well,
I'm glad that that someone else did the game right. If you've ever played PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds, it's that thing I made.
Yeah. You could have been that guy, you know.
No, they are way more talented than 18-year-old Jay. It's just the way it is, But
oh well. So as you're going over and making these 50 or so terrible prototypes, what was the feedback you guys are getting both within Wraith Games and between friends and family members outside of the company?
So it was kind of weird because a lot of my family was just like, oh yeah, you make games, that's a hobby, that's not a business, that's not something you can make money off of. And I'm like, well, someone's got to be making money somehow, you know what I mean? It's clearly there's money in there. From a lot of my friends, it was weird because you had the friends who really wanted to help. Then you also had the friends who were like, oh, that's really cool, but your games, like, there were a lot of people who were like, man, your games are terrible, but I don't want to tell you because I don't want to hurt your feelings.
Yeah.
And that was an interesting thing. Because that has made me paranoid that any praise we get about anything is just not genuine at all. And then the other set of people were just kind of like, oh, that's a cool thing you have. Man, I wish you'd stop talking about it. Because it was the biggest thing I did in my life. And so I talked about Wraith all the time. And it was really annoying.
Now, Steve, during this time, during these 50 terrible prototypes, did you think they were terrible as well? And how much input did you have on these prototypes?
This was before my time.
Okay.
I was in college during all these prototypes. I'd only heard about these in like history books.
Okay, gotcha. Fair enough.
You were in high school. You were in high school for about 40 of them, actually.
Oh, is that so?
Yeah.
The only ones I really knew about were the maybe Frag the Week and Project Zion.
Okay, gotcha. I was curious. So, can you kind of just maybe talk about briefly the journey so far for you guys from those 50 terrible prototypes to today? I know that's
I think
a long time, but if you could condense it because I really do want to get into the game that's coming out soon.
I think I'm actually going to let Steve field this because everything until Steve got on, and this is going to sound really sappy, but we went from basically being what everyone said we were, just a hobby, to being a legitimate business when Steve came on. Everything before like 2014, and he was just dipping his toes in 2014. It wasn't even concrete. But everything before 2014 was just like, we are friends making games, and we had no clue what we were doing. And then when Steve stepped on, that's what elevated us. So I think, Steve, I'd like you to do this part.
Okay. Well, thanks. First off, it wasn't just me; it was Lance too, and we all worked together. But I had a lot of input with a lot of things because I wouldn't shut up. So
Lance came on after you, so that's one of the reasons why I kind of
well, okay. So I think I joined late 2014, early 15, and it looked pretty much the exact same way that I thought it did in like 2008. So same logo. They were still working on Collapsus. They still had physics in the works, because I had like followed up with them. Like I would check their pages every now and then, and they had maybe like a blog post once every year. And it was just I could feel the struggle, but I would follow them on Twitter and their blogs. And I think 2014 is when we got the 200 square foot office. Right?
It's over 200 square foot, but we will always argue about that.
I will say that office, the unit is Jake gave me toward your guys' first initial office. Although small, very cool, by the way.
Thank you. You should come back and see the new place.
I will. As when it gets done, I will do not mind coming down again.
That'll be very soon. Okay, so we had an office. It was beige. It was terrible. It smelled moldy. It was just, but it was something. It was ours, And so we were. I got on board, and the first thing I convinced Jay to do was to do a rebrand, and that took maybe like 3 months to get everything like settled and every decision made. And we came out with the skull. We named him just recently, but the skull logo, the little skull's name is Yorick, a la Shakespeare. So
very nice.
And then after we actually at the same time we did the rebrand, we tackled our social media. And because any big business or any small startup, the best thing you can do is free marketing, which is social media. And so we committed to a blog post every week or a blog post every other week. It was
every week.
Okay, it was every week, and something like 6 to 8 Twitter posts a day. And
it was 6.
And from there, I think we shot up from like 80 Twitter followers to about 1,000 or something.
Yeah.
Impressive, very impressive.
Thanks.
And that was just a number. That was just a small number of months at that point.
Okay.
And then I think it took us a while to get organized to kind of focus on a singular game. Like right now, we are all collectively focused on getting Collapsus out, like me included. And I didn't want to touch it for the longest time because it was not the game I wanted to work on, but it's turned into something that I want to help get out.
It's just because maybe the team was so involved with Collapsus that you were kind of talked into it, or just over time, over development, you thought you saw something truly special with Collapsus?
I would say it's a mix of the two. It was something that existed, but all the projects existed before I got there. But Collapsus was like the child of the group, and I was like, I don't want to touch that child. I'll get in trouble, you know.
Fair enough. You don't want to mess with the baby in case if something goes wrong.
Yeah, Mama Bird will come after me or something.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't even say, and this is funny, and Steve and I have talked about this, but for me, Collapsus wasn't so much a baby as a bugbear. It was just the monkey on our backs, you know. It wasn't like, oh, this is this untouchable thing. It was, oh, why won't this game finish? Why won't we just get this game done? Because I know I'm eager, and I know the rest of the team's eager to move on to other things. But Collapsus's development cycle has just been kind of weird. You know what I mean?
Fair enough.
Keep going, Steve.
Okay. Well, so I was more interested in, like, because my background is in 3D and animation stuff, so I was really interested in like digging into physics, which was our 3D puzzle game. Which, you know, I know I said I didn't like puzzle games, but I mean, obviously I like Portal, and this was like pretty close to Portal at the time, so I really wanted to kind of cut my teeth on that project first, but that's turned into kind of our huge project. That'll be something to see in the next couple years.
Very nice. I can't wait to, like, I didn't really talk about physics very much today, because I mean, so I'm excited to see more about it in the future. But from when I saw Collapsus, I was very impressed.
Yeah, the thing about physics is, if you remember, and the audience as well remembers GamePro magazine, for a little while GamePro cast a net for independent developers to make a new exciting game. They were taking on being publishers, and this was around when Xbox Live Indies first launched. This was around when Unity was really hitting its stride, before it was even free. And like the thing was that we had created this prototype and we submitted, and we didn't think we were going to get anywhere, because there were like thousands, if not tens of thousands of entries into this contest. And I say contest because it was definitely a thing of skill, not really a thing of luck. But the thing was that we were one of 10 developers chosen to rep their new publishing arm. And so we were working on physics, and what ended up happening was GamePro magazine ended up going bankrupt. So the concepts we'd worked on for physics, and we actually took that to our first convention, and it was just overwhelmingly positive feedback, to the point where the reason Collapsus was even picked up in the first place is because we were heavily working. And then GamePro Labs, which was the publishing arm, then it died. And then we switched over to Unity. And again, this was before Unity was even like free. But the programmers at the time, none of whom are actually with us anymore. Like 2 of them are like doing 6-figure jobs elsewhere. One of them is part of a really cool think tank. And the 4th is a trucker now, and he's pretty happy with that. He doesn't program anymore. He's just on the open road.
Talk about a career change.
He actually left just because the stress was getting to him. He's just like, I can't. Everything's stressful forever. I'm just gonna truck, and he did, and he's happy now, and that's really all we could have ever hoped for him, because he was so sad. He was such a sad person. But the thing was that when Christie was convincing everyone to work on Collapsus, at the time people were like, oh man, how are we going to learn Unity? How are we going to learn to work in this engine? We need something smaller. And so some of the terrible prototypes were tossed around to like revive them. And that's when Christie was like, Collapsus. Collapsus isn't just small, it's amazing. And like, I love her to death, but at the time, Collapsus was not amazing. And hindsight is that Collapsus did not end up being small. So we literally put physics on the back burner for Collapsus. And then by the time we brought physics back, VR was in full swing. And so now that we're like actual registered Oculus developers, we've fully committed to doing physics in VR, which is going to be I think it's going to really take the concept to the next level.
I really, the way you guys are hyping up physics, I can't wait to get my hands on it. Um, but as far, we're going to talk about classes here in a second. But for both of you, so far, have there been any wow moments as being developers in the past? Anything that you guys, any event you guys gone to, any persons you've met, or any interaction you've had with fans, or anything like that, that's just made you go like, wow, I can't believe that just happened.
Let's start with yours, Steve, because I know I have a few, and I know I have a tendency to ramble.
So for me, the wow moments are whenever like Jay comes back to me with news like, we just talked to so and so at this event. I don't go to a lot of events, mostly because I went to the first event. I helped put on the first event that we're not put on, but show Collapsus at the first event that we did in a while back in 2015, was back when GDEX was called OGDE, and I didn't have a great time. I felt like everything was falling apart. It wasn't in the slightest, but I felt like we just didn't do it right. But then I kind of helped it. I did another event this past year, and it went flawlessly. So it was kind of like, what was I so worried about? So I don't really go to events, but I do see, like, when we get onto the news. When we get onto the news, that's a wow moment for me. When we get on to people's podcast, this podcast, that's a wow moment for me. When schools talk to us, when anybody talks about us, that's a wow moment, because it's just, more and more validation that this thing that I tried to get out of the hobby mode with these guys, is becoming a real boy. So
I certainly know the feeling, like with this podcast and talking with people like you. I never thought in a million years I would be doing something like this. So I totally get where you're coming from, and that's really awesome. And honestly, the first events never go the way you planned it to, just from experience also. But I mean, I'm glad that did stop you from, going away from the project to the company as well.
Yeah, and I think actually Jay and I will be, I don't know how he talked me into this, but we'll be showing off, we'll be exhibiting at a thing at the end of the month. And what is that? That's up in Columbus.
It is the premiere of Ready Player One, the movie. The real world parts of the movie are set in Columbus. And so, because it takes place on the futuristic VR internet. But the human parts are Columbus based, and so they're doing this big, huge like premiere party, and so they brought some Ohio, mostly Columbus, but anytime they do Columbus game developers, they drag us along too, just because. I'll get to why later, but just because we made some great friends in the industry, and so we're always invited to anything the Columbus people are doing because they're amazing and wonderful and they love us. And so we're doing that for this big whole thing, and it'll be nice. It'll be really nice.
Sounds like a good time. You said drag, so it sounds like, hey, you guys need to come to this movie premiere. It's like, oh, okay, I guess.
The thing that most people don't realize is I love doing events, but money is a thing, and being a small studio, we have to be very cautious of how much event money we're putting in, and so the last 2 years we did over 12 events a year, and that's like one event a month, and that means I can throw like $700, $800, $900 at an event, and that's fine. You know, the studio has that money. Anything beyond that gets to the point where it's like, but I want to go, and it's gonna be hard, but we'll make it happen, and we always do. We always make it happen. And so we're going to this Columbus thing, and it's going to be amazing. And I can't wait to see all of our developer friends, and I can't wait to show off Collapsus nearly finished. It's gonna be a big blast.
Go ahead.
We secretly love it when you twist our arm. We're a glutton for that kind of stuff.
It's true. It's true. I know some people are a little squeamish. I don't know.
Fair enough. Yeah. So, well, Jay, you haven't talked about your moments yet. If you could pick one or two.
I'm going to try. So my biggest, if I had to say my biggest WoW moment, was probably at this last Ohio Game Developers Expo, GDEX. They were doing their GDEX awards officially for the first time, and people who know me know that I like collecting awards for Wraith, because as Steve sees us on the news or listens to us on the radio or sees us in the newspaper, and that's validating. For me, I'm like, well, what do they know about video games? You know what I mean? Like the Fox doesn't know anything about video games. They just had us on to talk. So for me, I like awards because they're peer validation.
Okay. That makes sense.
And yeah, and so we had won a handful of awards for Collapsus before this, but that event, funnily enough, that event that Steve was talking about, the first that we did as a rebranded team, during that event we made a lot of friends. And this is where I said I'd get to that later, about the whole friends thing. I have a strange approach to networking, in that I will talk to people, and I won't think about me talking to them as a business connection. I'm just like, oh wow, you're making cool things and I'm making cool things. Let's talk about our cool things. And then we just become friends. And then every subsequent event we go and talk to each other with, I'm like, dude, we should hang out. And then only later will I realize, I'm like, oh, this was a business connection. Holy, what happened? What happened there? And so one of the people we met at the first event was Frank Lusby of Jam Sonic, and he has become a long-term friend. He came up to the studio like last month. No, it was like a week and a half ago, actually. He just drove like hundreds of miles just to come visit us, and I'm like, wow, that's really cool. And that was something that was from that first event that we did after the reboot, the first OGDE. Another group of people that we met was the Able Gamers charity. And the Able Gamers is the US's largest games-centric charity. And I believe they might be the world's largest, but I'm not sure. Games for Change might be, I don't know. I don't actually, no one quote me on this. So the thing is that they are about promoting accessibility options for people who need them, you know what I mean, for the differently abled gamers. And they came by, one of the guys, Brian, came by, and he's like, wow, so I noticed your blocks have all these shapes. Any reason you did that? And I had no clue who this guy even was. And I'm like, yeah, it's actually really, there's a funny story behind why our blocks have shapes. We have a colorblind team member who couldn't play Collapsus, and we only recently found this out, so we put these colorblind shapes in. And he's like, that is a great story. And of course, when I was telling the story, I wasn't in rush mode. I told like a good story. I told him like how we discovered and everything. And so he's like, can I bring Craig over? He's one of our other guys. I want him to play this. Yeah, absolutely. And so they come over and they start talking accessibility stuff. And we became friends, just talking about games accessibility and talking about the games we like to play and why they were important. And it got the entire team thinking about how to make all of our games more accessible, and not just in the colorblindness thing. We're talking about deaf players and like hard of eyesight players and like paralyzed players and all sorts of like even like cognitive disabilities, dyslexia, mental disabilities, things like that. We really started saying, why don't we cater to all these needs? Because it was super easy. It was, once we knew what we had to do, we're like, wow, this is not hard to implement at all. And that's kind of the whole Able Gamers philosophy. And so we met a whole bunch of other friends there. But at this last GDEX that we went to, they were doing these awards, and we sat down listening for awards, and I'm just like, oh, I hope we win something, I hope we win something, I hope we win something. And the first people came up, and it was like this is the award for visual excellence or something, and they had three runners up and then one big one. And so there's this long thing, and he goes up and he talks about all the things, and then the next one came up and it was mechanical excellence or something like that. And then finally, and each one of them had like three runners up and then one winner. And then Craig came up, and he says, I've prepared a speech. And the entire audience was just like, oh wow, what? And he didn't call any other people. The first words out of his mouth were Wraith Games.
Wow.
And he said Wraith Games from their very beginning has been devoted to excellence in accessibility. And I almost cried. And even thinking about it now, thinking like I'm kind of getting teary-eyed. I know it sounds kind of stupid. I get that, but we took on a task that was really important, and it became really important to us. And I went up there and I accepted the award and everything. And at that point, the people who won like mechanical excellence and audio excellence, they came up after everything was over, and I'm like, wow, congrats guys on all the stuff and everything. And they're like, well, you're the one who won the important award. Like, you're the one who won the award that meant something. And it was at that point, I'm like, I wouldn't need, they're like, no, you won the best one. And I'm like, I didn't really want to agree with them, but like, it was something important. And so that was kind of our wow moment, my wow moment, personally. And sorry,
it's like wow. I'm saying wow, was that my wow moment?
And so we won other awards as well. We're actually currently we're nominated. We're in the top 10 for the Indie Game Showdown at Game Developers Conference. Can everyone still hear me, by the way? Oh yeah. Okay. So the light on my rig turned off, and I'm like, oh no, that means everything's terrible.
You're good.
So the thing is that we're currently nominated for that award, and it has a $12,500 grand prize, and we're hoping to get that. And we also won Slide DB's App of the Year award for Best Upcoming App, Player's Choice. And the thing is that like, because there were five winners for that. It wasn't like a ranked thing. It was just 5 winners, and we were in there, and that was really cool. And even then, you know, we were called the best upcoming app of 2016, and we were also nominated for this, which the Indie Game Showdown is supposed to be like the best upcoming app of 2018, you know, and that's a GDC award. Even then, I'm looking at it, I'm like, I think I'd give it all up, you know, just for this, if I had to, for this Able Gamers award.
Very nice. I hope you guys win that GDC award. It sounds.
There's no chance. There's.
You never know. You're the top 10, right?
Yeah. The thing is that we are competing with because this particular award is specifically for mobile, and we are competing with some of the best mobile games primed to come out right now. And it is just an honor to be amongst them. You know what I mean? They are some real powerhouses, and it makes me feel good that people think that we're competing on that level. And so we're going to keep our fingers crossed, obviously, but if one of them wins, trust me, they have definitely earned it. You know, we won't be sad about it, because we're talking about really like excellent designed games here.
Fair enough. You know, only time will tell, but I hope you guys win.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
The other big WoW moment, I think, because like I said, I have quite a few, but I'll do what I call the funniest WoW moment, and then I'll try to give a little context for some of the others. Whenever we demo Collapsus, because we've demoed Collapsus to thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people, just because of all the events we've gone to. And the thing is that almost like inevitably we'll have like handfuls of people who will stay there for hours. You know, we're talking like 1 to 3 hours just standing at our booth playing Collapsus. And this happens all the time, and it's always a great feeling. I always love when that happens. I think our all-time record is a 5-hour guy, but he would walk away for 3 minutes at a time and come back. So I don't exactly count him. He was, I think he's like 12 or 13-year-old boy. And so he was there the entire time I was at the event, and it was hilarious. But the big WoW moment, I think, which was the funniest, was we had this little girl who was at the booth, and I told you this story at the studio. There was this little girl who was at the booth, and she was an aspiring game developer. This was at Game Masters the Exhibition, which is an internationally traveling museum show of games. I was standing next to like original art from WoW, like original concept art, and I was standing next to like vintage arcade cabinets, and I was standing next to like one of a kind prototypes, and it was just an overwhelming experience just being there in the first place. But this little girl was there, and she was there for an hour and a half, and her father kept circling around making sure she was okay, and she was just really into Collapsus. And then actually it was a little over an hour and a half, but then this other young woman came up, and she was playing for the longest time. And then so she was there for about 2 hours. And then so there is this man and his wife. And this was all at the same time. So at one time, all three of these groups were there. And so no one else was playing the game because they had hogged the entire table. And I'm okay with that. You know what I mean? Like, I think it makes me feel really good when people want to do that. So they start picking up these tablets, the husband and wife, and competing against each other for who can get the highest score. And so the thing about the woman is she's very, very pregnant.
Okay.
Yeah, like she was about to burst. And what ends up happening is she gently sets down the tablet, and we were near the front of the exhibit. And she gently sets down the tablet, and she's like, "I'm really sorry, I need to go sit down." And I'm like, no, you're fine. And she actually leaves the entire exhibit, meaning the only thing she's seen in this exhibit so far is Collapsus, and she had been there for like 2 hours. And so she leaves the exhibit and she sits down just outside the main doors. And the guy is still playing Collapsus. And he plays for 10 more minutes. And I look at him and I'm like, "Dude, your wife." And he just hurriedly puts the tablet down, and he's like, "Oh, crap." And he bolts for the door. And then after he gets to the door, he immediately turns around, runs back to the booth, grabs a business card, and says, "I'll buy this later. Thank you, bye." And he just bolts out again.
It sounds like she may have been in labor possibly at this point.
Oh, I hope not. That would have been great. That would have been wonderful. And I hope the baby's name was Collapsus. But it obviously wouldn't be. But no, it was wow. That was hilarious, and I'm so glad that happened. Now I will say that if I had to pick a third, really quick, we did have Gerard, the completionist of YouTube, play Collapsus, and this was last year, and we had been trying to get him to play the game for the entire event, and we caught him 5 minutes before he had to leave because his plane was about to take. And so he takes the tablet in his hand, and he's just like, yeah, and he's talking. He's like, I just really got to go and stuff. And there's a point where he makes an audible "oh" sound. He's just like, "oh," and that's when it clicked. And Pro Jared, another famous YouTube guy, taps him on the shoulder. He taps him on the shoulder, and he's like, dude, we gotta leave. The plane's gonna be going. And I kid you not, he lifts his arm and he bats him away. He's like, dude, just give me a moment. At that point, when I realized that Gerard the completionist was willing to miss his plane because he was sucked into Collapsus, I think that's just as much of a wow moment as those others. Not as much as the first one, obviously, but as much as my second one. So I just had to include it here.
Fair enough. I remember you telling me about the stories, and it's just, I can see why you had to include them in your wow moments of. Now, we have talked so much about Collapsus. I don't think we've actually talked about the game itself. So if you guys could, both of you really, kind of explain the objective of Collapsus, what it is, and why people seem to be so drawn to it.
Okay. So what Collapsus is it's a puzzle game. And I explained this at the prototype. You click an individual block, it breaks it forever, and then that causes a level up meter to go up, and that causes your resource meter to go down. But by creating columns or rows of 4 or more, you end up getting some of those breaks back so you can level up quicker and stuff like that. The big gimmick of Collapsus, and I'm going to call it a gimmick because this is something that I've really never seen anywhere before in a puzzle game. You can rotate your device. So say you're on PS4, you're not physically moving your TV or anything. What you're using is your shoulder buttons to rotate the center screen. You're rotating your device in order to change the way gravity falls. Because unlike something like Candy Crush, you're not swapping things. You're making individual breaks and things are falling via that. So you can't have like that side-to-side motion. But by rotating your device, that's changing how gravity works. Now, there's the 3 standard difficulties in timed and untimed, 2 unlockable harder difficulties, 25 challenge modes, which add all sorts of new stuff to the game, like split blocks, 1 color on one side, 1 color on the other, or obsidian blocks, which are big old rocks that have to be brought to the bottom to complete. Those are in the challenge modes. We also have 25 plus modes, which add new twists to those. There's a Zen mode where you just can't die. It's just a play forever kind of a thing. There are 300 built-in single screen puzzles. So you have one screen, and it's not even always like a full screen. You just have to clear the entire thing with your limited number of breaks. And there are 300 of those. There's a free daily puzzle that's brought to your device every single day. And those puzzles are all designed by Christy. So she's taking her Collapsus expertise and actually doing that in there. Then there's an online puzzle creation and sharing tool, so you can make your own puzzles and share them with friends. And it's no ads, no in-app purchases. And on a good chunk of the platforms, it's 99 cents. But on some of the others, it's more expensive. And that's because the more expensive platforms we're doing free DLC, and the first piece actually up to 8-player online versus. So you can do all the rotation and breaks and everything, but the better you do, the more junk blocks it sends to your opponent. And then we're translating it at least to start in 10 different languages, and we're releasing it on basically every major continent. Trying to get as much spread as possible. We have a bunch of accessibility options, for deaf people and colorblind people and visually impaired people and dyslexia-friendly font. It sounded like you're about to say something.
Yeah, and I noticed you haven't also talked about what platforms it's on other than mobile and PS4. So
there are a couple platforms that we are not allowed to mention. And I will say that it's probably pretty easy to figure out what those are, but I'm not allowed, so I'm sorry. But we're releasing on our kind of ad campaign for this is all your favorite platforms. And so that's iOS, Android, Fire Tablet, Windows Phone. And the only reason we're even doing Windows Phone is because the main programmer for this, Mark, he's really into his Windows Phone. And so we're just doing Windows Phone. And then there's also Mac, Linux, and PC. We were Steam greenlit, so we're going to be on Steam. Because if we were being greenlit, they still honor that, even though greenlight's no longer a thing. Then we're also doing PS4, PS Vita, Xbox One, Nintendo Wii U, Nintendo 3DS, and web. And then we're also doing a big old arcade cabinet, which it should be at Arcade Legacy, which is an arcade in Cincinnati at 3 locations. We've been talking to the owner about getting an arcade cabinet in there. And then all of these modes, all these different versions, all of the user-created content, like the user-made puzzles, they're shareable between them. There are online leaderboards for every single mode, and those are all shared between them. And then multiplayer is also cross-platform. And then we have cross-save. And these are all things, so I do have to put like an asterisk saying this is just development talk, and some of these features may not be in, and that's only to legally cover our butts. Because like, yeah. But cross-save is a feature that is very rarely used. That means you can be on your iPhone, playing on the bus, and you just you save and quit, and then you go out on your patio and you just play on your Vita, once you get home. And then from the Vita, you can save and quit, and then go and play on your Wii U if you want, back in your living room. And it's all, if you have this one unified Collapsus account, you can cross save. And that's also what ties together your high scores, and that's also what ties together your user created content. So you just have like a Collapsus username, which is associated with your Nintendo Network ID and with your PlayStation Network ID and your gamer tag on Xbox and stuff like that.
Very cool. I got a chance to play it on the Fire Tablet when I was at the studio, and I gotta say, I think you guys truly do have something special, and addicting. And the only reason I had to stop, you're very welcome. The only reason I stopped was because I had to go eat dinner, and I live like 45 minutes away. Otherwise, I probably would have stayed there longer talking with you and playing Collapsus. So it's still in development. So when can we expect it to come out? If you guys have a date or range.
Well, I actually, before we move on to that, I do want to make a comment to one of your comments. We try not to use the word addictive around here.
Right. I remember saying that. Yep.
So I'm gonna throw some shade at another famous puzzle game real quick. Candy Crush.
Okay.
Candy Crush and its ilk uses what are called Skinner box techniques. And Skinner box techniques are a set of psychological conditioning techniques that condition you to want to continue playing. It uses reward cycles, and it lights up specific parts of your brain to compel you to play more. It's psychologically addictive. Now, the thing is that those techniques were originally pioneered for behavioral conditioning, for psychology, and then they were used for slot machines. So Candy Crush lights up the same parts of your brain that a slot machine does. Now, Tetris doesn't do that. Tetris taps into your dopamine reward cycles in a different way, because with a game that uses Skinner box techniques, those are triggering the parts of your brain that are more viscerally triggered. Whereas a game like Tetris, it's triggering the parts of your brain that light up via stimulus of accomplishment. So like when you go do like 100 jumping jacks, or when you go get a promotion at work, that's what that's doing. And we have tried our darndest to make sure we don't use any Skinner box techniques. And one of the reasons Skinner box techniques are so useful for some game developers is because you can condition people to want to pay for microtransactions. because they're hooked. They're hooked, and they'll pay whatever they want, whatever you want for them to continue. And Collapsus doesn't do that because it doesn't need to. We created a game where the spawning isn't random, because in a game like Candy Crush, you have random spawn, random spawn, random spawn, and then every once in a while you'll have like a really difficult level that'll force you to pay your money. What we did is we have what's called bag spawning, which is similar to how Tetris does its spawning. It's not random. Instead, it gives you an even distribution of all the blocks. That means that you, on every given board, equally likely to make a match. On top of that, we have this resource management mechanic. So it's you as a player who's making decisions to reach yourself. Whereas with a game like Candy Crush, if you swap, there's no consequence for swapping poorly. And if you swap poorly, it just undoes it. It doesn't actually take the swap. So we're making the players make actual decisions about things. Couple that with the spatial reasoning of moving your device. It's like it's more of a Tetris feel than a Candy Crush feel, even though it exists more firmly in the genre of Candy Crush. Almost every single design decision that we've made was to say, we don't like how Candy Crush does things. Why don't we make a puzzle game that's actually good for the reasons we think a puzzle game should be good, not for the reasons that the executives over at King think a puzzle game should be good. And so we don't have addictive qualities within our game. We just have a solid gameplay foundation that makes people want to play. And that's I know, Steve, you have some feelings on this as well. Last we talked.
Nope.
No?
I don't remember the last time we talked about this. I was just gonna let you handle the science.
Okay. Well, I'm doing kind of a poor job of it. I don't have a prompt in front of me. That would have been nice. I should have put a scientific disclaimer prompt in front of my face.
So, Steve, do you find Collapsus, even though you said you weren't on board with Collapsus at first, do you find it now fun and you keep coming back to it?
So I don't play it unless I'm playing like a new feature or something that came out on one of the builds. I've got what do they call it? A spotted history with Collapsus. Me and Jay have talked at length about why it is I'm not that passionate about it. I really got into the development process after it was decided that we were going to put a mascot in, which is like the cherry on top. And so now we have a personable kind of connection with the game. And so that's kind of what gets me fired up about Collapsus anymore, is that now we've got a character. It's got a face now. So there's a little chameleon guy who's a demolition expert, and it's his job. And so you're kind of directing him. What blocks do we take down? And that kind of imaginary narrative kind of piques my interest a bit.
Oh yeah, for sure. I could definitely see that. And I do have a question for you specifically, Steve, because you are a 3D artist, and I've played Collapsus, and I don't recall too much 3D art going there. So are you able to translate some of your artwork and your skill set to Collapsus, despite it being more of a 2D type art style?
So I am the 3D art director, but I do a lot of illustration and 2D art. So
okay.
I illustrated the man, I just totally lost my place. I illustrated the mascot. I had a lot of input with the branding and a lot of the UI and the UX. And where the 3D comes in is that I don't know how I did it, but I finally convinced Jay to do like a full motion 3D trailer kind of like in the same vein of like a Nintendo game.
Oh, very nice. I don't think I've seen the trailer yet, but I remember.
It's still being worked on.
Okay, I can remember. I thought when Jerry and I talked about it, he said it was supposed to come out, but I forgot to look before this interview. So I'm glad I didn't miss it.
It'll be a big deal when it comes out.
Gotcha. I try and stay connected to your guys' social media accounts, so I am paying attention to all the updates you guys have been putting out there the past month and a half. This is kind of just the last question. This is a question we kind of ask.
Well, you already asked when Collapsus was coming out, and we never actually answered that.
Yeah, thanks for the reminder. Yeah.
So we are doing PAX East here in April 5th, and we have some big announcements that are going to be prepped for PAX East, and I can't say what those announcements are, but you guys are going to want to stay tuned for those announcements. And then as far as Collapsus being done, actually finished, which is not the same thing as released, it's going to be done this month. And theoretically, Steve's beautiful new trailer will also be premiering at PAX East as well. We're going to have that on a big TV at the booth. So ultimately, PAX East is kind of our big turning point, or let's get this game out there, So yeah, but it'll definitely be done like 10 minutes from now, basically.
Okay. So, but you said a release date is coming soon, like a definitive release date.
Yes, we will have a definitive release date soon. One of the big problems with coming up with a definitive release date is the fact that we are simultaneously launching on all of our chosen platforms. And so when we do that, it's going to be like, oh, well, that's why, because just working Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft, like just getting them to let us coordinate something on the same day is difficult enough, because there's all this QA testing and there's a lot of internal politics. But that's kind of where we are, is we're releasing all of the platforms one day, right there.
Well, I cannot wait to get my hands on it and to hear this announcement. So we will be keeping our eyes closed, just because PAX is going on anyway, but specifically as well as what you guys are going to be doing over here in the next few weeks is going to quick.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So this is kind of a question. This is going to probably be our last question, unfortunately, but it's a question we do ask all our guests on the show at one point or another. So as far as we're a gaming podcast, and we certainly talked a lot about video games, but specifically your video games. But what are some of your guys' favorite games growing up, and as much as possible inspirations for you guys as developers over the course of the years? This question goes out to both of you.
Steve, take it off. Do it.
Okay, so growing up, I was a huge Naughty Dog and Insomniac Games fan, so I'd have to say Crash Bandicoot, Jak and Daxter, and Spyro the Dragon and Ratchet and Clank are like my top games.
Very nice, very nice. And do you still find yourself going back to those games today? And are you still a fan of Naughty Dog, like the first like Last of Us and Uncharted series as well?
Oh yeah. No, I haven't actually played the Uncharted series, but I really want to. I actually just got a chance to play The Last of Us, and I loved it. And then the Insane trilogy that just got remastered, I still play that. That's like my go-to right now.
I didn't grow up with Crash Bandicoot because I didn't have a PlayStation, but now that the Insane trilogy was just announced for the Switch, I'm like, all right, I'm gonna give Crash a shot now.
I might buy a Switch just to play it on the Switch.
There you go. And I find a lot of people are doing that. A friend of mine, he just bought a Switch just because he wanted to play certain games on the go. It's
really useful.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it's crazy. It's a simple concept, but it's going to execute it so well. You can't fault it for it in any way.
Oh yeah.
So Jay, your favorite games that you have, your favorite game of all time, or growing up, or it's also served as inspiration for you?
So I have this weird thing where people often ask me my favorite game, and depending on the day it changes. So I have kind of a big top three in no particular order. And so two of them, I'm a huge Nintendo fan. So Steve is firmly entrenched in PlayStation. I'm firmly entrenched in Nintendo. And Steve is very much 3D motivated. I'm very much 2D motivated. The more retro we can get, the better for me. And so my two of the three are Super Mario World and Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. And it's gonna seem blasphemous because I've had long, like 3-4 hour debates with our programmer Mark on this, but my favorite versions are actually the two versions of the GBA.
Okay.
And the reason for this is there's some additional content, there's some fix there, they fixed some problems with it, and they're both a little closer to the Japanese releases than the American releases, and so those three things together make it great for me. In fact, I'm not good at mini games. Like, to be honest, I would say I'm good at Tetris, and I would also say I'm good at Super Mario World. I've been working on my world record speed run for that. And that's the only two games I'm really any good at, to be honest. But the GBA versions, I just think, take them to the next level. Now, I would argue that the Wii U port of Super Mario Brothers 3 for the GBA is probably the best Mario game ever made.
Okay.
Whereas I'm saying I'm saying Super Mario World's my favorite, but that's mostly because of all the wonderful e-reader levels that you get. As it's so much content on that. Now, the third would be Cave Story.
Very nice.
Cave Story, I love it for its aesthetic. I love it for its narrative. I love it for its mechanics. I love it for its music. And I love it for the story of the developer. He was one dude working a salaryman job. He's one guy, and he learned programming and graphic design and game design and music. He learned it all just himself, and then made this wonderful little masterpiece that I keep buying it every time a new version comes out. And it's funny because the original game is free. He released it for free, and so it's on every system I have, basically. So like I if I had to say, I think the Switch version's the best one. And the reason I think the Switch version is the best one is, even though I really like the DS version's map on the bottom screen, and I like the fact that there are printies in the 3DS version. Not only is it Cave Story Plus, but it also has multiplayer, and so I've been playing the multiplayer with some of my friends, and it's just something really nice, and yeah.
Awesome. That's certainly excuse me, a great choice between all of you guys. I hate to say this, Steve, I do gravitate towards James choice a little bit more because I'm an Nintendo guy. So I'm sorry about that.
No, it's all good. That's fine. I don't care.
but I will say, I do have a PS4 now. I'm trying to catch up on all my Sony stuff. So there is that. I just didn't grow up with it.
We'll welcome you into the fold with open arms.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm starting off with oh my gosh, I can't believe my mind just went blank. But I'm starting off with the main characters, Aloy, this woman kind of previous times, robot dinosaurs.
Horizon?
Horizon, yes, thank you. Horizon Zero Dawn. I know a couple people listen to this show, but I can't believe you just got the name of that. But yeah, that's my first Sony game I'm starting with right now, and I'm going through that at the moment.
That's on my list.
It's really good so far.
It's funny because like people who have seen my collection, I have a PS4 and a PS3 and a PS2, PS1, Dreamcast, Genesis. I have a freaking arcade cabinet, and like I even have a freaking Virtual Boy. Like, I love games in general. It doesn't really matter the source. Because like there's this thing where people are like, oh man, if you're a Nintendo guy, you must hate like other things. I'm like, dude, I have 1,500 plus Steam games. Like I don't hate most games.
Right.
It's just something about Nintendo specifically that makes me gravitate towards them, and I think that's the way people are with their favorites in general. You know.
I can agree with that. We all talk about on our show, it's three of which is four hosts total. Three of us are love Nintendo, and the fourth is, he doesn't hate Nintendo, he just didn't grow up with Nintendo stuff. But the three of us, we sort of say like Disney's almost, or not Disney, Nintendo is almost Disney-esque in the fact that they seem to have this kind of like magic wand that they wave, and anything they touch, not anything, but most things they touch, has this certain polish to it that people seem to gravitate towards for one reason or another.
It's weird because and I am an emotional person. That's one of the problems is I cry a lot for a lot of different reasons, and Nintendo games are one of them. I will, anytime there's a new Nintendo system and I boot up the requisite Mario game or the requisite Zelda game, I will find myself within like a half an hour of playing, tears, like silent, manly tears streaming down my face. And it's always weird because I like to say that Nintendo has this innate quality where anytime I turn it on, I'm 9 years old again. You know what I mean? For a brief period of time, I am 9 years old sitting in my living room again. And that's kind of the way it is with Disney too. I mean, like, heck, I was watching I know there's a lot of hate for Frozen, but I was watching Frozen, and I, like, halfway through the movie I realized, I'm like, they did it to me. Like, I am a child again. Crap. What did they do?
Our last guest that talks about Frozen 2 said basically the same thing you did, and I'm going to tell you guys the same thing I told her. I just recently watched Frozen for the first time in the past couple months. Don't know how it happened, it's just how it happened. But I'm sitting there watching it, and I'm like, this movie is not what I expected it to be, and it's actually really good. I would think, like, between all that hype over the years that it's gotten, I'm like, I'm not going to like this movie. There's no way. And then I'm watching it, I'm like, dang it, Disney did it again.
Yeah, that's one of the things, is the marketing is the most annoying thing about Frozen. It's not, the movie's great. It's like Rick and Morty. The problem's the fans, not the show.
Yeah,
it's actually
the marketing. They make Elsa to be the main character, so I'm thinking, well, I'm gonna see Elsa the entire time, and she's in the movie, and it's kind of about her, but it's more about her sister and the relationship that they have. And I'm like, I was not expecting that at all.
Yeah, and it's weird because, like, I actually think that both Tangled and Moana are better movies. But there's something about Frozen that I will watch Frozen more often than I want to watch Moana or Tangled. Even though from a structure standpoint and even an aesthetic standpoint, I think that both Tangled and Moana are better. Frozen, I'm just like, oh man, fine, I'm working. I'll just put up Frozen in the background. I'll just listen to it, whatever. Of course, I do the same thing with, like, the Lion King and Aladdin and stuff. It's just like, yeah, screw it, fine, Lion King, whatever, you know.
Fair enough. Well, unfortunately, I think we're gonna have to wrap things up here, Jay and Steve. I thank you for taking the time out for coming on the show. And just as the last thing, where can our audience find you guys on various social medias and the interwebs?
So, company-wise, we are at Wraith Games, WRAITH Games, on Twitter. We are also Facebook.com/Wraith Games, Google.com, or Google Plus, or just plus Wraith Games. We are at wraithgames.org, .com, .net, wraith.games if you're feeling feisty. Almost everywhere you need to find us, we are Wraith Games. And then on the personal end, and I don't use this very often, but I'm SIRKIDD2003 on Twitter. And then Steve, what are you?
And my Twitter, even though I don't post as much as I probably should for somebody in the field, is at Wireframe Rabbit. Sounds just spelled exactly how it sounds.
There you go. guys, thank you so much for coming on the show. I can
Hey,
assure
thanks for
you-
having us.
Oh, no,
Yeah,
no. I was
thank
just
you.
gonna say, I can assure you both. You guys will be on the show again. There's no doubt about that.
Oh, well, thank you.
You're
Is that
very
a promise?
welcome.
It's guaranteed?
It's guaranteed. This is a guarantee. This is a RDP guarantee. We've had EP guests before, and it's always a blast having people on past guests on the show. And you guys, for the work that you're doing and the work you have done, I can assure you guys will be on the show again talking about Collapsus and physics again.
Well, nice. Thanks for having us.
Oh, no
Yeah,
problem.
absolutely. Thanks, man.
It's been a blast. And for everyone out there, as always,